Hi everyone, this is my first video for Macbeth. So in this video I'll be going through Act 1, Scene 1, the first ever scene in the play. And I'll be going through the witches in particular and how they've been introduced in the play overall. So as you can see in the scene itself, it's not a very long scene. We're introduced to the three witches, so first witch, second witch, third witch. And sometimes they're referred to as the three weird sisters, and a little bit later on they are referred to as the instruments of darkness, so very dramatic. But we'll see a little bit more about what is actually happening in this scene, and we're going to be going through some key language analysis and a little bit of structural analysis. But really the main thing I'll be going through is actually what is being said in each line, what do the witches actually mean in each line, and then what does that suggest about them as well. I'll also be looking a little bit at the stage directions within this, and then what does that actually show us about the witches overall. So without further ado, let's have a look at the stage directions. So stage directions are here for us to kind of see, to kind of really set the scene. Shakespeare really uses this so that the actors and the directors would know how to set the scene in particular, because do remember, the plays are really meant to be performed. We're not really supposed to be sitting back and reading it. They were plays, so they are supposed to be performed. But the stage directions tell us that there is thunder and lightning. So that's a really bleak, quite like a stormy and dangerous environment to start the scene on. And straight away, that creates a really dangerous atmosphere, quite a mysterious atmosphere as well. And I don't know about you, but actually as soon as I think about lightning and thunder, or thunder and lightning, it just kind of creates this sense of like foreboding, like something is about to happen, and it kind of gives me like a little bit of a tension inside, like what is going to happen. And so that is a deliberate choice by Shakespeare. He wants us to feel that straight away. So clearly he's indicating that this is not going to be a happy-dappy play like Romeo and Juliet was. This is going to be something quite dark and mysterious, and he's really setting that scene straight away. The interesting thing about this is that it is thunder and lightning. So, I mean, thinking about the time periods itself, the Jacobean people did believe that the witches can control the weather. So, you know, is he indicating here that the witches are controlling this weather, that they are, using thunder and lightning to do all the little evil things or the mysterious things that they're going to be doing a little bit later on? So something just to think about. The other thing to think about as well is the fact that we have the three witches in the first scene. Why does Shakespeare deliberately begin the play with the witches? That's a question we really need to think about, because he could have started the play with Macbeth. The play is called Macbeth, so why not introduce Macbeth right in the first scene? But he deliberately chooses to introduce the entire play with the witches. And the key thing with that is, if he is starting the play with the witches, he's clearly demonstrating to us the importance of these characters. So Shakespeare's really trying to show the audience that actually these three witches are incredibly important characters, and actually they're going to be pivotal to the rest of the play. So they're really deliberate choices that Shakespeare actually makes. So it's definitely something to consider as well, and something you can talk about for your AO2 language and structural analysis in your exams and your essays as well. Moving on, the first witch, she says, "When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?" Now, what I find really interesting is whenever I mark GCSE papers, and if this scene ever comes up, it's really interesting to see how many students actually skip this line and they don't really look at some of the kind of indications that we get here. So when I look at this, the first thing I'm thinking is, why don't the witches have names? And I suppose when you are giving someone a name, you're making it sound more human. So if the witches don't have a name, then it kind of makes them seem more inhuman, more formidable, and it really kind of adds to this sense of mystery about who are they, where have they come from, what are they doing. So the lack of names really adds to the mystery around the witches. What I find really interesting is this word here, when. When shall we three meet again? And that really indicates that the witches are really up to something. You know, there's thunder, there's lightning around, they're deciding on when to meet. You know, it's clearly they're up to no good. And so it really kind of adds to that sinister nature of the witches. And it really kind of makes really makes it clear to the audience that we are going to come across the witches again. And the kind of last part to this, in thunder, lightning, or in rain. So actually, the witches are deciding what weather to meet in. Are they going to meet in thunder? Are they going to meet in lightning? Or are they going to meet in the rain? That's not something you would normally kind of separate. Normally when we have those three weather elements, thunder, lightning, rain, they always come together. So the witches are actually deciding when to meet, in what type of weather to meet. And actually, if you're thinking about your AO3, your context, the Jacobian people did believe that actually the witches could control the weather. So Shakespeare is really giving us a brilliant clue here that actually the witches can control the weather, because clearly they're deciding when to meet, what type of weather to meet in. So actually when we start analysing this scene, we really need to get down to that word level choices, because that tells us so much more about the witches overall. The next part, the second witch starts to speak. When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. So again, we've got that repetition of the when. Clearly the witches are making all the decisions. They are deciding when to meet, where to meet, what they're going to do. So it's really showing us that actually the witches have a lot of control over the events right now. And so is Shakespeare doing that to show the audience that actually the witches are going to have control of the play and the events as well? You know, are they the leading figures here, the leading characters here? So really good kind of word level analysis can be done for that word when. The next thing, the hurly-burly. So the word hurly-burly actually refers to the sounds of the war. So those guns and the battles and the swords and all the kind of screaming and shouting. And if you think about what happens a little bit in Act 1, Scene 2, we know that Macbeth and Banquo are out in a battle fighting on behalf of King Duncan and Scotland overall. So there is actually a battle and a war happening at this point of time. So literally the witches could be referring to that. They could be saying, right, we're going to meet when the war is done, when that battle is done. They do say that they're going to meet when the battle is lost and won. Now that is a paradox. I'm going to explain a little bit what a paradox actually is. But what they're essentially saying is that we're going to meet when the war and the battle is done, and you know, when the battle has been lost and won. And if you think about a battle, there's always one winner and one loser. So a really interesting piece of analysis there for the second witch. But I want to dig a little bit deeper into these two lines in particular, because when I think about these two lines, it actually gets me thinking a little bit more beyond the sound of battles. When I'm thinking about the hurly-burlies, are the witches actually talking about the battle, the physical battle that's happening, that Macbeth and Banquo are fighting in? Or is it a little bit more sinister than that? Are they referring to the moral human battles that are going to continue to rage in the play? So we know there are a lot of battles, emotional battles, physical battles, spiritual battles that take place in the play. So are they actually saying that they're going to meet at the end of the battle that Macbeth is taking part in? Or are they saying they're going to meet again when the overall battle, those emotional battles, those spiritual battles, when those are done? So for example, we know that in the play, Lady Macbeth has a spiritual battle as well. You know, at the start, she's more than happy to kill King Duncan in order to gain power. But by the end of the play, that guilt gets to her and she commits suicide. So That's a moral human battle that is taking place in the play. Macbeth is another example. So at the start of the play, he is this really heroic, amazing soldier in the army, really well respected. However, that thought of becoming king, his ambition, his lust for power, that all takes over, and he has some real moral dilemmas throughout the play. Like, should he kill King Duncan? Should he be killing his best friend Banquo? And then he does actually become a tyrant, he starts to become more murderous, and eventually he dies in the end as well. So actually then, my question is, are the witches talking about the battle where it's the battle between Macbeth and Banquo and the people that they're fighting, so the physical battle? Or is it the battle that they're thinking a bit more kind of deeper about, which is like the moral human battles? And when you think about that, that actually fits in with the expectations that we have of witches, that they know the future, that they have a much more sinister plan in place. So some kind of deeper analysis can be done with that word, hurly-burly. And then next part, this idea of battles lost and won. So what battle is this? Is this a battle that I just mentioned before, that Macbeth and Banquo are fighting on behalf of King Duncan? So is it that physical battle? Or is it the battle for kingship? Macbeth wants that power, he wants to be king. Duncan does die, so ultimately Macbeth wins, Duncan dies, he loses. So is it that battle? Is it Macbeth's internal battle, his internal battle for ambition and knowing what is right and wrong? Is it that battle they're referring to? Is it the battle between the supernatural and the humans? Because the witches are a supernatural being, referring to the witches, going to the witches, the prophecies, all of that is part of the supernatural. So is it a battle between the supernatural and the humans? That's something that could be considered as well. Or overall, is it a battle between good and evil? So this idea of the battles lost and won, it's not just as clear cut as they're just talking about a physical battle. It could be much, much more than that. It could be all these different types of battles. Whenever I think about this quote about the battles lost and won, it also makes me think about the quote at the end of this scene when the witches say, "Fair is foul and foul is fair." And when I talk a little bit more about that quote a little bit later on, you'll be able to see the similarities between the two. So lots to think about in that quote there. The next part. So do bear in mind the witches are still deciding when are they going to meet. The third witch says, "That will be ere the set of sun." The first witch, "Where the place?" Second witch, "Upon the heath." So my first thing is that actually the witches are literally saying they're going to meet when the battle's lost and won, and they're claiming that this is going to happen before the sun sets. So immediately I'm thinking, well, how do they know this? How do they know that the battle is going to be over before the sun sets? So the witches are actually predicting this. They're predicting when that battle is going to be over, and that fits in with the expectations that the Jacobians had of the witches. They believed that the witches can control the events that happen, the witches can predict the future. So straight away Shakespeare is giving us lots and lots of clues about these witches and what they can do and what powers they possess. As a little bit of a deeper analysis, I was actually thinking about King Duncan and how King Duncan's death is being foreshadowed here. So this idea that actually the battle's going to be over with the set of sun. So when Macbeth is going to see the witches, that's the start of the plan to kill King Duncan. And when he does kill King Duncan, that sun will set because Duncan is the light. He is the king. He's a virtuous and good king, so he represents light. And by killing that light, darkness is going to take over Scotland, and that darkness is Macbeth. So perhaps there's a bit of a deeper interpretation here that actually the set of sun is when actually Duncan is dead, he's gone, that light is gone, and actually darkness is setting in, and that's Macbeth. And if you think about it, they do meet again. We do come across the witches again in Act 4 once Macbeth has become king, and he has become quite a dark character, and he goes back to see the witches to get more prophecies and more predictions from them. So it does actually come true, it does actually happen. The other thing is that the witches decide to meet upon the heath. Now, the heath is a barren land. This is where nothing really grows. There's no life in that land. And if you think about the witches were not really accepted in society, because they were not seen as, normal, civilized human beings. They were seen as these supernatural beings. So the witches are agreeing to meet in a really remote and abandoned land. Not only does that add to that kind of sinister feeling of the witches, but it also just shows that actually the witches have really abandoned all human things, all things that almost kind of refer to life, because it is a barren land that they are meeting upon. The next line, there to meet with Macbeth. Now, what's really amazing about this line, and what's really interesting about this line, is this is the first time we hear about Macbeth, and Macbeth is the pivotal character in this play. So the first time we hear about Macbeth is through the witches. Now that is a deliberate structural choice by Shakespeare. He is deliberately introducing Macbeth through the witches, and we have to question why. Why does he actually do that? Is Shakespeare trying to immediately show the audience that there's some kind of bond, some kind of link between Macbeth and the witches? We don't know what that link is. We don't know what that bond is just yet. But he's immediately tying the witches and Macbeth together. Is Shakespeare trying to show us that actually the witches are going to have a really pivotal role in Macbeth's life and his development as a person and as a character? So it's something we have to think about. Why does Shakespeare introduce Macbeth through the witches? Something to think about, and that goes towards your AO2 analysis as well. The one thing it does make me think is, actually, should we be scared for Macbeth? Clearly the witches have a plan for him. So should we be scared for Macbeth? That's something we need to think about. The other thing we need to think about is actually, now that we see that the witches have premeditated this, they have planned to meet Macbeth, they've got some kind of a plan in place for him, do we actually blame Macbeth 100% for all the events that happen later on? Or do we actually feel sorry for him? Because clearly, he's not got full control of his life here. Clearly, the witches are controlling some things that are happening in his life, if not all the things that are happening in his life. And so therefore, everything that happens afterwards, with King Duncan's death and all the murders and the killings and eventually his death as well, all those deaths, all those events were inevitable. Something to really consider for Macbeth's character. The next part, the first witch says, I come, Grey Malkin. Second witch, Paddock calls. Third witch, anon. So a little bit of AO3 contextual notes for you. During Shakespeare's time, so during this Jacobean time in particular, witches were known to have familiars, and these were like an animal guide or like a spirit that they had with them. And this is something that people believe that witches would have, because it's a way to connect the witches to the devil. So the familiar would normally be an animal like a cat or a toad or a dog, and this was normally given to the witches by the devil, and it's a way of connecting and a way of communicating between the witches and the devil. So something to think about here then. The first witch is saying, I come, Grey Malkin. So clearly the witches are responding to their familiars. Now we can't hear what the familiars are saying. We can't hear the familiar calling the witch, but clearly the witches can hear this. So they've got a deep connection with their familiar, and therefore that indicates they've got a deep connection with the devil. And so this really fits in with the views of the Jacobean audience, that the witches are these dark, evil beings who work with the devil. And then straight away, this is indicating to the audience that the witches are dangerous, destructive beings. They're connected with the devil, and anything to do with the devil is destructive, it's dangerous, it's sinful. So something there to think about in regards to the familiars. The final part, and this is where all of the witches say this in unison: fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air. That last part is just a stage direction. It just means exit. So as suddenly as they come, they suddenly disappear. The first thing, the witches are speaking in unison. They're all speaking together. It's a bit of choral chanting here. And that adds to that very sinister kind of atmosphere. They clearly are all aligned in their message. They clearly have thought about what they're going to say, and they are all united in what they're going to do. And so the fact that they're united, the fact that they are speaking in unison, really adds to this kind of like unnatural, ominous atmosphere. I mentioned this word before, a paradox. Now, a paradox is quite an interesting technique. It's a statement that seems like it's contradictory and almost like absurd, it's really silly, but actually in reality it could express some kind of truth. So fair is foul and foul is fair. So if something is fair, it means it's good. If something is foul, it's bad. So in a nutshell, the witches are saying that what is good is bad and what is bad is good. Now, those are contradictory statements. What is good is bad, what is bad is good. That's contradictory. And it sounds like it can't be true, but in a paradox, it actually expresses a possible truth. Now, actually, if you think about what happened, the characters that are supposed to be good actually end up having bad qualities in them. So let's take Macbeth, for example. What is good is bad. So for Macbeth, at the start, he is this really heroic, good character, a really respected character. But by the end of the play, he becomes this murderous tyrant. So therefore, that statement, although it's contradictory, is actually true, because what is good is now bad. So actually, that makes me think now, are the witches more intelligent and omniscient than we actually believe? Do they know more than we do? Can they see what is happening ahead? And actually, when we read the rest of the play, we start to see how true this statement actually is. Fair is foul and foul is fair. What is good is bad and what is bad is good. A little bit more with this quote. Hover through the fog and filthy air. Now, if you hover through something, think about that action. Does that mean is that referring to the witches? That the witches are hovering through the air? Kind of creates this imagery that the witches are flying through this filthy air, flying through the clouds. And actually, if you think again about the Jacobeans' expectations of witches, they did believe that witches could fly. But what if this hovering is referring to the other characters like Macbeth, like Lady Macbeth? Think again about that action of hovering. If you're hovering, you're not really focused on everything 100%. You're kind of almost gliding through things. You're almost like in a trance where you're just kind of going through things and you're not 100% seeing what is around you. You're not 100% aware of what you are doing. So could this be an indication that Macbeth will just hover through what the witches have planned? and actually he's not going to really see the witch's real intentions. Something to really think about, that verb, that idea of hover. A little bit of structural analysis for you now. So we've done a lot of talk, a lot of discussion about the idea of the language and keywords, and we looked at some AO2. But actually, let's think about some structure now. In terms of structure, look at the stage directions. So stage directions are that actually all these witches are talking together, they're speaking in unison. So again, as I mentioned before, they're really united in their mission to see Macbeth. So does that make them more dangerous? Because they're all together. The other thing is the rhyming couplets, and there are some other examples of this as well. And actually, this is a really interesting piece of analysis you can do with this, because rhyming couplets is something that Shakespeare normally uses for more higher ranking characters. So the higher ranking characters, like Macbeth and so on, they're the ones that normally speak in poetry, and the lesser characters, they're the ones that normally speak in prose. But the witches are almost speaking in poetry here. Think about the word fair and air. And so actually, this is quite unnatural for what we'd expect from the witches. And this really gives the witches a sense of authority, a sense of power. Is Shakespeare really trying to suggest to us that the witches are much more intelligent than they seem? They are much more higher ranking in terms of their role in the play than we would think. And now we're going to look at the rhythm and the pattern. So usually in Shakespeare's plays, he uses iambic pentameter for his really higher ranking characters. And that's usually a series of unstressed and stressed syllables. So for example, Macbeth, a little bit later on, he says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." So that follows a pattern of da-dum, unstressed, stressed, da-dum, unstressed, stressed, da-dum, unstressed, stressed, and so on and so on. So the way that the iambic pentameter works is by it really emphasizes those stressed syllables. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. And that's usually used for more higher ranking, more educated, more important characters. However, Shakespeare really breaks his own rule for the witches here, because they speak in trochaic tetrameter, and a trochee is actually the exact opposite of an iamb. Instead of having an unstressed, stressed, that da-dum, 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 that kind of natural pattern, it's actually the opposite. It's more stressed, unstressed. So dum-da, dum-da, dum-da. And that sounds really bizarre. That sounds really unnatural. And that really fits in with what we would expect from the witches. It kind of creates a little bit more of an eerie kind of chanting sound from them. But that style of speaking is just a little bit more unnatural, or very unnatural compared to what we've seen before or what we're used to. And that really fits in with the witches. That is what we'd expect from the witches. Everything's unnatural with them. So for example, the line from the witches, they say, "Fair is foul and foul is fair." Look at that stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed. And that is a trochaic tetrameter. Now, the one thing I will mention here is that we are missing a unstressed syllable at the end of that line. So that syllable has been dropped. And that's something to think about. Like, why do we drop? Why has the witches dropped that? Why has Shakespeare dropped that? Is it again that he's trying to suggest that even with this unnatural order, the witches are still in control of their words? They are messing with the natural order of speaking. They are deciding what to say. That's one thing we could think about in terms of why has that last syllable been dropped. But this is a structural technique, a structural intention from Shakespeare. He's decided to do this deliberately. And again, it's really showing us the control the witches have on what they are saying. It's quite difficult to speak in that pattern, that stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed. Fair is foul and foul is fair. It's quite difficult and unnatural to speak in that way. And so it shows the control the witches have on what they're saying. They've clearly thought about it and they've clearly premeditated what they're going to say, what they're going to do, what their plans are for Macbeth. And so that really adds to that sinister, foreboding feeling we have from the witches. And so the idea from this entire scene, not just this structural technique, but this entire scene is about introducing the witches, making sure the audience understand how unnatural these witches are, how sinister they are, but at the same time, how pivotal they are to the events ahead. We have to give them more credit than what we would assume from witches. They're actually a lot more intelligent, a lot more manipulative than what we would assume from witches. And so Shakespeare is really giving us a lot of clues here regarding the witches. So that's it. That is the analysis of Act 1, Scene 1. I hope that has been helpful. If you have any questions or if you've enjoyed the video or if it's been helpful, please leave a comment below. I'll be making lots more videos going through some key scenes and that will be uploaded very soon. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube or follow my page on Instagram and I'll be adding lots more videos soon.